Hello everyone and welcome to another Movie Nights review. Today we're going to be doing a full spoiler review on the entire Echo series, all 5 episodes. I did an initial review of the first 3 back when the show initially dropped with its embargo, but now, since enough time has passed, it's been a few days, almost a week essentially, I want to dive into each episode, full spoilers, and talk about my overall thoughts on the show. So without further ado, let's dive in with episode 1. It was basically a glorified recap, which is what I said in my initial review, but diving into it specifically, we see straight-up sequences from Hawkeye being used, especially when he tells her that Kingpin essentially wanted her father dead and caused that whole drama. We see some gaps in between, which were interesting. Okay, the fight with Daredevil was fucking awesome. And there's no way around that. I mean, even the fight scene leading up to it, I thought the action choreography was very well done. They utilized Maya very well, going in and out from her perspective of draining out the sound, bringing it back in, kind of matching how it was being shot to her confidence level in the fight. When she fucking stopped her leg so she could wait and kick Daredevil at the right moment, that was awesome. And I actually thought it was interesting that Kingpin promoted her, essentially because the way he put it was, none of my men have ever held their own like that against him. And now that we know that these Netflix shows are indeed canon, hearing that history, hearing that acknowledgement to Maya felt very cool, and it added something special to her character. She didn't necessarily win that fight, but she did hold her own quite well. At the end of the episode, she goes and she meets Henry Lopez, or I think Black Crow they called him. And by the way, that actor, I thought he did a really amazing job in the show. But basically, she kind of just says, she kind of just wants to tear down whatever Kingpin is starting and wants to kind of do her own thing, maybe even take it over. She kind of is a bit unfocused on exactly what she wants to do, but she knows she wants to cause some sort of chaos. He is not about it. He's like, absolutely no way. And that's kind of where we end with episode 1, kind of being fully caught up to where Maya is at now. Episode 2, to me, was the weakest in the series. We get a little bit more into the backstory of her ancestors, which we also got in the first episode of the series. And while I love where that ended up, I thought the build-up wasn't done quite well, and even with a good payoff, I think you also need to have really good build-up in order to have something really hit home, and this episode didn't do the best job in continuing that build-up. And the episode does have its highlights, like Biscuits. We get a lot of Biscuits. I love the character. I mean, yes, some of his humor does kind of go against the R-rated tone of the show, but overall, I think the character has a lot of authenticity to that cousin that we all have. The train sequence was a little bit of a letdown, and it's not really an action train sequence, it's more of just an extended sequence of her planting some sort of bomb on a train that's going to one of Kingpin's facilities. The only cool thing about it is we do see a brief glimpse of her powers kind of shining through, but to me it didn't make the sequence overall worthy, and the cuts back to Biscuits, while funny, were tonally weird. I do wish there was just slightly more ass-kicking on the train. I feel like that would have helped a lot. Then we go into the third episode, which to me is arguably the best episode of the series. Members of Kingpin's crew are pissed off that she blew up a big facility of theirs, and they go to her hometown looking for her. And it culminates in this fight sequence at this skating rink, rollerblading rink. And the sequence is pretty incredible, I'm not gonna lie. It might be the best action scene on Disney Plus in quite some time. The only thing annoying about the sequence were the captors, the people who turned on Henry. They were a bit annoying, and while it was nice to see them get their ass beat, the build-up with them was just kind of like, okay, I just want to see them get their ass kicked now. They're not building suspense for me, they're just being annoying. And the episode, of course, ends with Maya arriving at a house where Kingpin is there. He is in Oklahoma and very unexpectedly has shown up with his little eye patch that is also a reference to the comics. Which takes us into episode 4. This is also an episode I enjoyed. It dives into, Kingpin and Maya's past a little bit more, showing, again, some sequences from the Hawkeye show, but also showing a lot of newly shot footage. And this is when the Kingpin first starts to really feel like that Daredevil Kingpin, especially when he beats the shit out of that poor vendor for being rude to Maya. And it was a really haunting sequence when he's just beating the ever-loving shit out of this man, and Maya comes up and also kind of joins in, giving a little, shoves and kicks to him. And, you kind of see that bond start to form. And then so a lot of context before that then gets drawn into play with that connection she feels to him, because their connection is through violence itself almost, which is very disturbing when you think about it. And basically, Kingpin invites her to just stop what she's doing, stop the bullshit, get on a plane, go with him to New York, and just kind of be his right-hand woman and help run things. And she considers it at first, which I think was a bit of an annoyance in the storytelling, because we all knew she wasn't going to fucking do that. And while the idea of giving her something that allows her to talk to somebody, and she sees the signs, like the American Sign Language, I thought the execution of that looked quite silly, and I wish that it just looked conceptually a little bit better. Ultimately, of course, Kingpin shows Maya the hammer that he used to kill his father, a callback to Netflix's Daredevil, even though it's clearly not the same hammer. And some people have made the joke of, like, Marvel's recast it again, and that's all funny, but to me, I kind of read that situation a little bit differently. It's almost just this manipulation tool on Kingpin's part. Like, does he really keep that hammer? Or was he just trying to use that idea to manipulate Maya into joining him, and he just grabbed the hammer nearest to him that looked the oldest? And I think there's an argument to be made for both. And then we get into the finale, where Kingpin and his army is going to invade this Choctaw powwow, and I think you get some of the best moments of the series in this episode, even if the episode itself felt a bit rushed. Those moments being Maya's scene with her grandma at the dining room table, to me, is the best sequence in the entire show. And that's the first use of referring to Maya as some sort of echo, when the grandma says, we echo through you, and talking about the ancestors and that power that their family has. And emotionally, it really worked for me. I kind of felt bad for everything Maya had been through at that point. I felt bad for her family, for how everything's kind of fallen apart. And you also get the sequence where Maya gets to speak to the ghost of her mother after her grandmother had made her outfit. Her outfit looks great, by the way. And while I like the sequence itself of her talking to her mother, I do wish it had kind of established early on that maybe she was eventually going to speak to the ghost of her mother. It didn't feel built up. It just kind of, she walked into a room and there's Ghost Mom, and they just kind of had their conversation. And the idea of it didn't quite work for me, but the scene itself did work for me. And then you get to the actual powwow. I kind of liked that the stakes were a bit more personal, and that the villains essentially were just going to hurt something very personal to the characters and the characters' family. And that threat felt very real, and it felt like it could be achieved. Did I like the actual representation of just pointing a bazooka at it? Not really, and I didn't think Biscuits running them over with the truck was the best solution, but I thought that the sequence with Kingpin and Maya was quite well for the most part. That sequence when she drops down and you see, like, all the members of her ancestors, like, form into one person, I thought that shot was awesome as shit. I loved it. And while the fight was a little bit disappointing, and the actual setup of Maya kind of going into Fisk's mind to kind of try to talk him off a ledge and convince him to kind of change his ways. While the setup is where the show kind of falls a lot. But the payoff of her being in there, being in an alternate reality version of, his room as a child, similar but different from the Netflix show. I think it's because originally it probably wasn't going to be canon. But she just kind of talks to him, tries to understand him, tries to convince him to stop, and then eventually they come apart with him just saying, like, what did you do? And I thought that itself was a bit disappointing, but the confrontation not exactly being just a full violent one was an interesting way to go, and I think ultimately that part of it worked. And then, of course, the mid-credit scene is Kingpin learning that the New York mayor spot is open, which he's obviously going to run for and probably win for the Daredevil Born Again series. My overall thoughts on the show is that it's okay. It does a lot right, but it also does a lot wrong. The story itself has fantastic moments, and while the story of her family and her ancestors is interesting, and the story of her and Kingpin is interesting, I think the combining of those stories didn't quite work. They didn't quite put those puzzle pieces together correctly, but that doesn't mean we didn't get great things out of this show. It doesn't mean that there weren't great moments from the show and, something to build off from this character, and I did leave the show liking Echo more, wanting to visit Echo more than I did at the end of the Hawkeye series. And of course, I left the show fucking amped for Daredevil Born Again, but I didn't need the show to be amped for that. And ultimately, I think it also comes down to just being handicapped by the 5 episodes thing. I feel like if the show had more time and more money, it could have been a lot more interesting. And thankfully, now Marvel has, going to completely redo the way they do their TV shows, starting with Born Again, so we're not going to see this change until Born Again. But I think it could have been a lot worse, but it could have been a lot better also. So those are my overall thoughts on Echo, guys. What did you think of the series? I'd love to hear about it in the comments below. Thank you guys so much for watching, and we'll see you on the next review.